The sound of tearing fabric split the storm like a gunshot, and in that instant, Malachi Brookie knew nothing would ever be the same. He stood waist-deep in the raging river, rain hammering his hat, his hands trembling as he stared at the shredded pieces of wet cloth clutched in his grip. The woman was breathing, alive, pulled back from the edge of death, but the fear in her dark eyes was not relief. It was terror, and it was aimed straight at him. She stumbled backward through the mud, clutching what remained of her traditional dress to her chest, her gaze flicking past him toward the tree line as if something far worse than the river waited there. Malachi tried to speak, tried to explain, but the words caught in his throat. In his world, saving a life was simple. You helped and help was understood. Torn cloth was nothing compared to a human heartbeat. But as she pressed herself against the riverbank, scanning the forest with desperate urgency, Malachi felt the ground shift beneath his understanding. This was not his world. 3 hours earlier, the day had been ordinary. Malachi had been riding the canyon trails, tracking a small group of missing cattle that had wandered off during the night. The land was familiar to him, every bend of the canyon and cluster of rocks mapped by years of solitary work. Then the storm came without warning. The sky blackened as if swallowed whole, thunder cracking so close it rattled his bones. Wind tore through the trees with violent force, bending them until their trunks groaned in protest. Any sensible man would have turned back, sought shelter, waited it out. Malachi should have done the same. Instead, he heard screaming, not the cry of an animal caught in the weather, but something sharper, rawer, human terror, slicing through the storm with unmistakable clarity. He spurred his horse toward the sound, riding hard down the slick, rocky slope until the canyon opened onto the river. What was usually a manageable stream had transformed into a roaring monster, frothing and wild, its current smashing against stone with relentless fury. And there she was. The woman was trapped in the water, her long black hair plastered to her face, her body dragged sideways by the current as it pulled her toward the rapids downstream. Her dress, heavy with water, clung to her like an anchor, threatening to pull her under. She fought with everything she had, arms flailing, feet searching for purchase on stones that vanished beneath the churning surface. Malachi did not hesitate. He vaulted from his horse and plunged into the river, the cold slamming into him like a blow. The current seized him instantly, trying to claim him as it had claimed her. But years of ranch work had hardened his body. He forced his way through the water, every muscle screaming, until he reached her just as her strength began to fail. For a brief moment, their eyes met. In that instant, Malachi saw more than fear of drowning. He saw fear of him, fear of a stranger's hands, fear of what survival might cost. There was no time to think. The rapids thundered closer, and hesitation meant death. He wrapped an arm around her waist and fought the river with everything he had. As he dragged her toward the bank, he felt the fabric of her dress strain beneath his grip. Then came the sound, a sharp rip, unmistakable even over the storm. The tearing cloth was followed by her sharp gasp. But moments later, they were out of the main current, collapsing onto the muddy shore, alive, safe. Or so Malachi thought. That was when he felt it, the weight of unseen eyes. Shapes emerged along the ridge above the river. Dark silhouettes against the storm clouds, warriors, dozens of them. From their vantage point, they saw a white man standing in the river, clutching torn pieces of a woman's clothing. While she backed away from him in terror, they did not see the rescue. They did not hear the scream or feel the river's pull. Ayanna pressed herself against the riverbank, her breath coming fast as she spoke urgently in her own language. Malachi raised his hand slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. "I was trying to help," he said, his voice barely carrying over the rain. The words only seemed to make things worse. She shook her head violently and pointed toward the ridge. Then, to Malachi's confusion, she scooped up mud and smeared it across her arms and face, her movements frantic, desperate, as if trying to erase something. A war cry split the air, raw and guttural, answered by others from different directions. Malachi's blood ran cold. Stories he had heard all his life suddenly became very real. Ayanna grabbed his arm with surprising strength. For a moment, he thought she was seeking protection. Instead, she shoved him away, hard enough to send him stumbling back into the shallow water. "Go," she whispered in broken English. "They will kill you." The first warrior began descending the canyon wall, moving with effortless grace. Others followed, stones clattering loose beneath their feet. Malachi counted at least 12, their weapons visible even through the rain: bows, clubs blades that caught the gray light. Their faces were painted for war. The leader reached the river and stepped into the water without hesitation. He was broad-shouldered, powerfully built, gray hair braided with feathers. His eyes locked onto Malachi with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. He spoke, his voice heavy with authority. No translation was needed. Judgment had already been made. Ayanna rushed forward, throwing herself between them, pleading rapidly. The man's expression did not soften. If anything, the sight of her torn clothing deepened his rage. More warriors formed a loose circle around Malachi, weapons lowered but ready. They were waiting. Malachi realized with sickening clarity that every sign of struggle was being read as proof of an attack. The torn fabric floating in the river felt like an accusation in his hands. The leader raised his war club. Malachi knew he was out of time. Then another voice cut through the storm, deep, commanding, absolute. The war club froze midair. The warrior stepped back as an older man emerged, moving with deliberate authority. He wore no war paint, but the feathers in his hair and the intricate beadwork on his vest marked him. Unmistakably, Ayanna went rigid. "Father," she whispered. Takakota took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. His daughter's torn dress. The white man in the river. The warriors ready to strike. He spoke sharp and controlled, asking questions. Ayanna answered quickly, gesturing toward the river and Malachi. Takakota listened, his face darkening. Then Ayanna did something unexpected. She pulled a small leather pouch from around her neck and handed it to him. He examined it and something shifted. Orders were barked. Warriors began searching the riverbank and canyon walls. "What are they looking for?" Malachi asked, not expecting an answer. Takakota turned to him. "The men who chased my daughter into the river." The words hit like a hammer. Men, plural, Ayanna, had been fleeing something long before. The water claimed her. She had not fallen by chance. Takakota studied Malachi's face in silence. "My daughter says you saved her life," he said. "She also says 3 men with yellow hair chased her. Men like you." A shout came from upstream. A warrior held up a scrap of blue cloth, not from Ayanna's dress. A white man's shirt. More war cries echoed, closer now. Figures poured into the canyon from every direction. 200, maybe more. Ayanna whispered the number. Malachi's stomach dropped. She explained quickly how men had attacked their camp during a sacred ceremony, killed elders, stolen holy objects, threatened to return. She had followed them, trying to help her people. Takakota listened, fury simmering. When Ayanna revealed the brass military button she had found, everything changed again. Malachi recognized it instantly. Fort Carson. He spoke before he could stop himself. "They're deserters." Takakota questioned him and Malachi explained. Ayanna added what she had heard about a ship, about fleeing to the coast. Malachi knew the trails, the stations, the people. "I can help you find them," he said. Silence followed. Takakota studied him, then spoke. "If you lie, you will die." Malachi nodded. At last, Takakota gave the order. "We ride at first light." Dawn crept slowly into the canyon beneath a sky still bruised with storm clouds, the air cold and heavy with the smell of wet stone and trampled earth. Malachi had not slept. He sat near a small fire that barely pushed back the chill, listening to the low murmur of warriors preparing for the ride ahead. The soft snorts of horses, the creak of leather and wood. Across from him, Ayanna moved with quiet purpose, tending to her father's war horse as if the violence of the night before had already been folded away and sealed behind her eyes. Her long black hair was braided tightly now. Her torn ceremonial dress replaced with practical riding, clothes that allowed freedom of movement. Still, the memory of that torn fabric clung to Malachi's thoughts like a shadow he couldn't shake. 50 warriors gathered as the light grew stronger, chosen with care, each man hardened by experience, each horse lean and powerful. Takakota moved among them without raising his voice, his authority absolute, his presence alone enough to steady the tension that lingered in the air. When he finally approached Malachi, there was no anger in his eyes now, only calculation. The hunt had begun the moment the order to ride was given, and from that point forward, hesitation had no place. They rode east through Willow Pass, exactly as Malachi had predicted, the trail slick with rain but still readable to eyes trained for it. Hoofprints cut deep into the soft earth, overlapping and scattered where the riders had pushed their horses hard. Takakota's scouts moved ahead into the flanks, silent as ghosts. reading signs Malachi would have missed entirely. As the sun climbed, the land opened into rolling valleys, broken by stands of trees and low ridges that offered both cover and danger. Ayana rode near Malachi, her gaze constantly scanning the terrain, alert and focused. "You've tracked men like this before," she said quietly. Not as a question but an observation. Malachi nodded. 3 years ago, deserters, they burned a homestead not far from my land. Although memory tightened his jaw. We caught 2. The 3rd escaped. Ayana stopped her horse for a fraction of a second, absorbing the words. "The one who escaped," she said carefully. "The one you believe led the attack on our ceremony." "Sergeant Pike," Malachi replied. "If he's involved, he won't surrender. He never does." The knowledge sat between them heavy and unspoken. Takakota returned from conferring with his scouts, his expression grim. "They have gained numbers," he announced. 6, maybe 7 riders now." The news rippled through the group, tightening grips on reins and weapons. Numbers mattered, especially when the enemy was trained and desperate. Not long after, one of the scouts returned with a water-stained piece of paper pulled from his vest. Takakota took it and unfolded it with deliberate care. Malachi read the message over his shoulder, each word stoking a familiar anger. Pike was taunting them, threatening to burn the sacred objects one by one. Ayana's breath caught when she saw the name signed at the bottom. "He wants us to panic," Malachi said, "to rush in without thinking." Takakota's jaw clenched, but he nodded. As they rode on, a column of black smoke rose on the eastern horizon, unmistakable even against the gray sky. Murmurs spread among the warriors, grief and fury mingling in equal measure. But Malachi studied the smoke closely, something in its thin, uneven trail gnawing at him. "He's bluffing," he called out. Takakota reined in beside him. Malachi explained, quickly pointing out the color and behavior of the smoke. "He's burning scrap, not the sacred items. He wants you to think." "Time has run out," Takakota studied the distant smoke with the eyes of a man who had seen many deceptions. Slowly he nodded. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Pike's camp lay below them, clear and exposed. 7 men clustered around a fire, horses picketed nearby, leather bundles stacked close. Takakota spread his warriors along the ridge, silent and invisible. Malachi pointed out likely lookout positions, escape routes Pike favored. Every detail mattered. Then a lone figure stepped away from the camp, walking openly toward the ridge, a white cloth tied to a stick in his hand. Ayana stiffened. "Flag of truce." Malachi recognized the man instantly, the swagger unchanged by time or circumstance. "That's Pike," he said. Pike stopped well short of the ridge and called out, his voice carrying easily. He spoke Malachi's name, proving he had known they were coming. Suspicion flickered in Takakota's eyes, but Malachi met his gaze steadily. Pike called again, inviting negotiation, threatening destruction if ignored. Time compressed into a narrow, dangerous space. Takakota weighed the risk, then signaled. Together, he, Malachi, and Ayana descended into the valley, every step watched by unseen eyes. Up close, Pike's pale eyes glittered with amusement as he laid out his proposition, offering half the stolen items in exchange for safe passage. Malachi answered him calmly, naming the dead Pike had left behind. Pike shrugged it off, unmoved. When Takakota demanded surrender, Pike revealed his hidden advantage. Rifle hammers clicked back from the rocks, a deadly ring of steel and threat. But Takakota did not flinch. He answered with a signal of his own. Warriors rose from places Pike had not considered, arrows trained with lethal precision. The balance shifted. Malachi spoke again, bluffing about Pike's informant, watching closely for a reaction. Pike's confidence faltered just for a moment, and that was enough. When Pike reached for his gun, Takakota moved. The war club struck with finality. The valley erupted into brief, brutal violence, ending as quickly as it began. When the dust settled, Pike lay dead, his men captured or slain, the sacred bundles untouched by the dying fire. Takakota inspected them in silence, relief softening his features. Ayana stood beside Malachi, her expression unreadable but steady. The threat was gone, but the weight of what had almost been lost lingered heavily in the air. The return ride was slower, quieter, as if the land itself was taking a long breath after the violence that had stained it. The warriors moved in a loose formation now, no longer hunting, no longer braced for attack. Pike's weapons and the recovered sacred bundles were secured carefully. wrapped and guarded as if they were living things. Malachi rode near the rear, the rhythm of hooves giving him space to think. The canyon already felt distant, like a bad dream fading with the daylight, but the echo of it stayed with him all the same. When they reached the edge of the tribal lands, Takakota called for a halt. The horses were watered and a small fire was built. There was no celebration, no shouting of victory. Instead, the elders gathered, and the sacred bundles were unwrapped with solemn care. Ayana knelt beside her father, her hands steady as she helped lay each item out on a woven cloth. The warriors watched in silence, heads bowed. For Malachi, the ceremony felt heavier than the battle itself. This was what everything had turned on, not revenge, not blood, but the preservation of something older than any of them. Takakota rose and addressed his people, his voice carrying without effort. He spoke of restraint in the face of anger, of patience over recklessness, of the danger of underestimating both enemies and allies. Then he turned to Malachi. The chief's gaze was direct, unflinching. "You were not born among us," he said, "but you chose to stand with us when you could have walked away." A murmur rippled through the gathered warriors. Takakota continued, his tone neither warm nor cold but resolute. "For that you are owed more than thanks." He gestured, and an elder stepped forward holding a small, carefully carved token, a piece of bone etched with symbols that Malachi did not understand but felt nonetheless. Takakota placed it in Malachi's hand. "This marks you as a friend of our people. Where this sign is known, you will not stand alone." The weight of it surprised Malachi, not in heaviness but in meaning. He closed his fingers around it without speaking, knowing that words would cheapen the moment. Later, as the sun dipped low and the camp began to settle, Ayana approached him. The tension she had carried since the night of the storm was gone, replaced by something quieter, more grounded. "You could have taken your horse and gone," she said. "Many men would have." Malachi shrugged slightly. "Didn't feel right." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if confirming something for herself. "The plains remember choices like that," she said. "So do people." At dawn the next morning, Malachi prepared to leave. There was no ceremony this time, no formal farewell. Takakota clasped his forearm once firmly. Ayana stood nearby, her expression calm but intent. As Malachi swung into the saddle, she handed him the folded jacket he had given her days before, now cleaned and carefully repaired. "Some debts don't end," she said simply. Malachi took it, meeting her eyes. "Neither do some roads," he replied. He rode west as the sun rose, the open land stretching out before him, unchanged and yet entirely different. Back at his ranch, life resumed its familiar rhythms, mending fences, tending cattle, watching the weather roll in across the horizon. But there were moments, standing alone in the quiet, when Malachi would touch the carved token in his pocket, or glance at the jacket hanging by the door. He knew the world beyond. His land was larger and more complicated than he had once believed. Weeks later, a rider appeared at his gate, carrying news of renewed trade between the tribe and nearby settlements. Fragile but hopeful. Malachi listened, nodded, and said little. When the rider left, he returned to his work, the weight of responsibility settling into him like a second skin. He was still a quiet rancher, still a man of few words, but his place in the world had shifted. Sometimes, it only took one small act of kindness to redraw the lines of a life forever.